originating on this brilliant motion. I have two things/training with me, Patrick and Sharon. Judging. Okay, the motion that this House has a newly elected U.S. President denounce American exceptionalism. I invite the Prime Minister. I like it.
America is no longer as great as it perceives itself to be, or as the world perceives itself to be. The concept of American exceptionalism was envisioned after World War II, where their citizens needed the motivation to move on World War II and to recover from the atrocities that existed there. This belief was constantly perpetuated after World War II. Children were indoctrinated that they are the best beings in the world ever since they are young, and that idea is instilled into them so long and throughout their entire life. This idea is very bad because not only it stagnates their growth, but they also have this superiority complex where they think that I should impose my idea over the world, that I'm the best, other countries are shit. These kind of ideas are abhorrent. We as the newly elected US president would do this. We would tell people why this is not true, that US is falling behind. China is not far away, economically away from them. Social inequality is horrific in USA, worse than Scandinavian countries. What we want to do is preach the narratives of equality, that you should not impose your idea that you are the best throughout the world. You should just be good, accept the ideas of equality, accept that you should be equal to other countries and do have global cooperation with other countries, not have unilateral intervention. We would teach these individuals since their education and their textbook, and we would tell them that you should not be segregated from other parts of society. You should be part of the world. Two arguments in his speech. Firstly, why this is untrue and this policy does not reflect the true scenario in the USA. Secondly, why even if it's true, it's harming towards individuals on the ground, and it will be pretty harmful for your presidency if your people continue to believe in it. Firstly, why this is not true. We think that Americans always like to pride themselves as being all free, the country that's the freest in the world. This is not true. They are not as free as you think. Based on statistics, they are literally the second most free nation in the world. You have electoral fraud happening. You have gerrymandering happening in Texas. These kind of things are not supposed to exist in the first world countries, and yet they still think they are debt free. Next, they have the highest rate of incarceration in the world. People are unnecessarily jailed for petty crimes that they can actually solve through correctional facilities. Next, there are crazy high tuition fees in those kind of countries. Student goes on crazy loans and have to pay up their fees throughout their entire life. Then you have crazy for-profit corporation such as the NRA, where they create crazy gun laws. They prevent individuals from having common sense gun laws to protect them. These kind of ideas are pretty bad. They are not as free as they seem. But next, they are not so economically powerful as they perceive to be. China is growing a lot. It's expected that China would beat them in the next 10 years. US is being left behind now. So, like in a desperate attempt, US, like obviously they have TPPA to try to improve their economy, but in the process they piss other country off because people just think US with this kind of idea of superiority, they just think that US is trying to take advantage of them. So even if they argue that maybe TPPA might be good in some case, we think that the idea of it is that you are intervening into their policies, which is even worse. Next, social inequality. You think that racism is horrific over there. In the first world countries, those kind of appalling standards of racism should not exist. You have police discriminating individuals on a basis of race, where you have like unnecessary incarceration and incarceration based on your race. That is pretty bad. This also shows like how well Donald Trump is actually doing in the US. This shows that people are still being racist. They still think they are that good when they are actually pretty racist around the world. Then you have the rich-poor gap. On a comparative, in a first world nation, you are not supposed to have those rich-poor gap. People still think that they are better than Scandinavian countries when actually the rich-poor gap is so appalling. Why is this harmful? Americans are hiding behind the veil of truth. People don't exactly know what is happening, and even if you show the statistics on them, they just cover it behind by saying, no, the statistic is not true, I am still the best. Lots of people keep thinking they're the best. They brush aside the problems in the US because they just think they're best. So when there's bad policies, they just brush it aside. We tell you that they also brush aside other countries' idea because they just think they're the best in the world. And lastly, it's bad for interaction around other countries because of this superiority complex. So for example, like you have the NSA, where they keep spying and checking on people because they think they're so good that they should control the world, that they should check all of the emails, including the emails of the German Chancellor, Mr. Speaker, something very bad. This also leads to bad foreign policy when countries are scared to deal with the United States of America. Because every deal done with them, there's always the perception that they are trying to intervene in your politics. That's why this is bad. Before that, go.
American exceptionalism is not just positive. It is also negative exceptionalism that highlights the bad points of America. Allowing this to exist allows us to correct the mistakes instead of pointing the blame and saying we're just as bad as everyone else.
No, sir. I think if you look at Democrats, one of the Democrat nominees like Bernie Sanders, people accuse him of not being an American exceptionalism. And this gives like Republicans a lot of leeway to attack him as an unpatriotic person in United States. That's pretty harmful as well. Thirdly, even if it's true, we tell that people would go through a developmental slump, and this is happening right now in the United States or America. They keep thinking that they are already the best people in the world, and they stop developing. They stop innovating because they think they are few steps ahead of other countries. Next, in terms of foreign policy, especially intervention, they keep wanting to intervene. But the point here is this: they not only want to intervene, they want to intervene unilaterally because they think that other country ideas would stop like their ideas from being effective. They keep thinking that they'll do better than other countries. In terms of foreign policy, people also they have the perception that they don't want to negotiate with the USA because they are scared the USA will take advantage of them. People keep wanting to intervene, but this is harmful because not only it's only unilateral, it's not globally cooperated, and they always think they're superior. Whether or not it's true that it affects their foreign policy or not, when things go wrong, they just shift the blame on other people. This is the case like in a proxy war in Afghanistan, where all they did was shift the blame into Russia, even though they played a part in causing the mishaps that existed there. But this is the flip side. And America, without this idea, is a future where children of America don't think that they are superior and don't think that they are better than individuals of the earth, of other people. These are the individuals that they think that they have to globally cooperate because they are citizens of the earth. We are very proud to propose.
Prime Minister, invite leader of opposition.
Yeah.
American exceptionalism plays an intrinsic role in the development of that country, of America itself. And we think that it also plays an intrinsic role in the development of other countries. And we think that these countries will emulate the American exceptionalism, right? So we think that this form of policy or this type of ideology, yeah, affects other countries on a global scale, right? We can perceive it on a negative scale, but we have to look at the positive side on how it will help other countries and how it will help our people as well. I will engage with the idea of negative exceptionalism and why it can be fixed and why there is a duty for America to fix these problems in the first place. But from opening opposition, what do we stand? From opening opposition, what do we stand for? We think that American exceptionalism is an idea that America is distinct and unique in the ways that they deal with their issues, in the ways that they deal with their foreign policy, right? And this is beneficial. We also think, so sit down. It is a recognition that America is superior and it is superior and a powerhouse in dealing with these issues. We don't necessarily think that it's a powerhouse in terms of pushing away other countries, but a powerhouse and an influential party in terms of helping other countries in the first place, right? And helping its own people since they are such a large and influential power. No, sit down. Let's look at opening government because they mainly wanted to engage the idea that we need to work with other countries. We need to accept equality and assume ourselves as the same as other countries. They also told us on why the American exceptionalism is not true. We have moved from that, right? That America is now creating bad policies and pushing countries away. Is this necessarily true? And is negative exceptionalism a bad thing? No, sit down. We think that ultimately it's mutually exclusive, right? Negative exceptionalism or negative policies in general exist in every country, right? So these are things that we are already obligated to fix in the that we are already obligated to fix in the first place. American exceptionalism is pointing out why we are superior, right? Why we are ahead of these other countries, not of certain policies that every country already has, right? So if every country already has that those negative policies, or if they think of themselves and other countries think that they have these negative policies, then we move on to the positive policies, right? We see who is more. We will look at who is more liberal. We look at who helps countries more than the others, right? So that's the exceptionalism that we want to focus on, and how we can help the world, we can help our own people. But secondly, your case doesn't necessarily matter because the idea of bad policies or bad progression already happens within other countries as well. No, sit down. Then on your idea of foreign policy, right? On how these countries were less like these countries were less likely to cooperate with other countries because they think that they are distinct. No, sit down. We think that we still have to cooperate on a global scale, right? That's our duty as a superior powerhouse. Because even though we have those exceptions, even though we think that we're distinct, the whole world agrees that we're distinct, right? But the whole world assumes us as a national, as a universal police, right? Because we are so powerful, because we are so superior. So it doesn't matter if we are distinct. It matters if we act in a way that that we don't want to help other countries, right? So we can assume that we are distinct, but help other countries in a certain sense as well. So we have that obligation because countries depend on us in a certain way, right? Just like how the countries depend on the five UNSC nations like Russia and France because they are so powerful, right? I'll tell you why the US in this scenario is very distinct. So the conclusion of this foreign policy argument is that we still can help, but we have to stick to the exceptionalism to help. We have to stick to exceptionalism in order for this help in order for these foreign policy executions to carry out helping other people. Before I move on, closing.
Look, even if we accept our negative characterization of American exceptionalism, what will be the more powerful rhetoric? That United States is the best country in the world and you are the best citizens, or your standard of negative characterization?
Okay, I already told you that every country has a certain negative or rather what's perceived as a bad policy, right? Or what's perceived as a bad form of progression. That's why countries tend to look at what you do the best, or how you can contribute to the global scale at the best way you can, right? And we think that the United States are the only party that can do so. No, sit down. My first argument: why is American exceptionalism good? Firstly, on the first level, we think it provides a uniqueness and allows better policies in dealing with these problems. So we do agree. We do agree on a certain scale that there may be bad policies, there may be racism and problems that are going on in this state, right? But as a powerhouse and as an exceptionalism, we have a duty, or we are obligated, and if we call ourselves distinct, that means we are superior, right? That means we are obligated in dealing with these problems in the first place. So things like liberalization, things like progression, things like allowing abortion, right? So but the distinction is, under your policy, you can't do it because you don't consider yourself as different, right? So if you consider yourself as same as other countries, there is no need for a form of progression, right? Because you are the same as other countries. Because you are the same level of other countries, so there's no need for you to step up. There's no need for you to step up your game, right? The argument that because they are superior, the argument that because they are superior, they don't need to do much anymore is completely irrelevant, right? Because they had the obligation, if they have established themselves as a superior power that needs to help people. But secondly, we think that it gives other nations an ability to emulate these acts, right? So because we are liberal, because we are superior, other countries depend on us, right? So it doesn't matter. It doesn't only go to the extent of them depending on us. It's the extent of them wanting to be us, to be superior, to be powerful. So they'll emulate us in a way where they are liberalized, and where they'll try their best to be liberalized, and they try their best to emulate the progression that the United States has done. We think that for every step the United States has taken, it's to help its own people, and it's to help the progression of the world on a global scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. I invite that to Barbie.
The idea is, even if they have bad policies, and it includes blame.
A developed nation being willing to help other less developed nations when they encounter problems is not an exclusive benefit of American exceptionalism. It's not something that only the United States does. But the problem, however, that we brought to you that they never seem to recognize was that that's the mentality of US citizens, right? That the land of the free is the only land of the free. That the land of the greats is the only land of the greats, right? And that's the problem with superiority, right? Because as much as they try to say that American exceptionalism can also be used negatively to recognize that our problems are exceptional, here's the thing. What sounds best in a presidential candidate's promises and what sounds best in textbooks is not to say that we are exceptional in that we are exceptionally horrible. Most of the time, in reality, we are exceptionally superior because we are Americans, right? Because we can claim the entire continent as our nationhood, while other Latin American states can't do the same, right? So I'm going to answer two questions before moving on to an argument, right? First of all, does American exceptionalism really mean that the United States helps other nations more? And even if we lose that particular benefit, why is that so beneficial still in comparative? And second of all, in which side do we get more progress and examination of the problems in the United States? Is it in theirs, where we have this kind of where we have this superiority complex, or is it in ours, where we recognize that we are the same and we're just as screwed up as everyone else? First of all, does this mean that the US helps other nations more? Because their logic is this, right? That American exceptionalism means that we have an obligation, and that's when as the United States we feel like we need to help other people. Two responses. First of all, every other nation is cooperative and helpful without believing in their superiority, right? Like Germany, France, they don't need to tell themselves that they're better than everyone else in order to help them. What's the harmful part of this though? The problem is that the point at which in foreign policy talks, where their superiority is questioned, where they're no longer the best country in the room, that's when the American exceptionalism theory becomes a problem for them, because then they no longer have that obligation. Because if their logic is obligation comes from being superior, the point at which they are no longer superior, that's when they decide to do their own thing and decide they have no responsibility to help other individuals, and that's the problem with their foreign policy right now. But the worst thing though is this, that even if their obligation remains the same, even if it's true that they're superior and they will remain superior always, right? That's a problem of that white savior mentality, right? And that's the reason why they end up doing things like unilateral invasions, right? Where they never learn from what they've done. The problems that they did in Afghanistan, they repeated again in Iraq, right? Because they believe that because we are superior, of course we know just what you need in order to save your country, right? And let's be very honest, right? They screwed up very much in those situations, especially because they believed they were superior, and that is what is festering on in the Middle East today, right? That the narrative against the West, because of the way that the US tried to impose their superiority on these nations. We don't think that this means that the US is in any better place to help other nations. We think it's harmful the way that they help other nations. Let's talk about this second question though. On which side is the handling of problems of the United States better? They tell us it's because they tell us several things, right? First of all, that their world is one where the US is very much different from others, and therefore that means they deal with problems differently. That's the only thing that's different about them. But the thing about dealing with problems differently is twofold, right? First of all, what Kenneth told you, right? That it means that they believe that they are apart from each other. So in foreign policy, they're a lot less likely to want to budge, especially when they feel that their own sovereignty is being questioned, right? But the second problem is that when they feel they need to deal with problems differently, that's what makes them more likely to want to do things such as arm Syrian rebels, that some of them even ended up becoming a part of ISIS, right? So it's this kind of snapshot, it's this kind of snappy kind of judgment as to this is how we're going to deal with problems that sometimes means that they don't make very wise decisions, right? So we don't think being different in terms of dealing with problems is necessarily a good thing. But how does American exceptionalism operate in reality? We think it means that kids grow ignorant of their own problems, right? Because they're brought up to believe that sure, we do have problems, right? But they're more often told to brush over those problems because look at everything else that we have. Look how free we are. Look how much riches we have. The problem is very obvious in the world today, right? That's why racism, the racist narratives of Donald Trump's campaign are succeeding so much in the political opinion polls of the United States right now, because they've never been told that they are equal to every other race. They've never been told that they need to recognize every other race as equal to them. That's why those kinds of racist narratives are so predominant in the United States, right? So what's the problem with them being so okay with this kind of racism, because they can brush it over by saying, but we're free, but we give them green cards sometimes, right? The problem is that this affects the way that this particular president is going to be able to have talks, right? Whenever he starts his presidency, right? So this means that as a president, you're going to want to look as best as you can whenever you present yourself to the world, especially since you've been newly elected, right? That means that you're going to want to look not as someone who thinks that he's superior and who is above all of your talks. You're going to want to look like someone who is accepting, right? Who recognizes that the United States has their own problems and has problems that they may have imposed upon you, but now is apologetic and recognizes those things. You can't look as if you recognize those problems when you don't recognize them and instead say, I'm superior, so those problems don't mean much. But then their response was this, right? Well, the United States may have problems, but every other nation has problems. They're not going to think about the world anymore because I guess we're all equal and we're all just as bad. But here's the thing, right? Every nation that recognizes they have problems generally have citizens that want to deal with those problems because those citizens recognize those problems. The problem is when United States citizens no longer see those problems, right? When they don't notice how much of an economical slump that they're in, that's the problem that happens. And that's when you have a nation that is in a slump and will not recover from itself, right? We told you already, right? American exceptionalism as a narrative and as a propaganda and a theory, right, was started off after the World War II in order to encourage people at a point at which they were at their lowest and needed to feel superior in order to have anything to move on. They don't need that kind of motivation right now. We think that kind of motivation is what puts them in a slump. We think the motivation that they need in the world of today is to recognize they are no different from anyone else, and that's why they need to move forward. and they need to move forward. Let's talk about my argument, why this needs to be the very first move of this president, right? So your first move as a president generally is an identifier of what you stand for as a president, right? An example being Obamacare with Obama. So he was a very free person who wanted to take care of his citizens. What's this first move going to look like for this particular president? It's going to look like he's a person who wants every other nation to know that he is now willing. He's not going to be that permanent five individual who beat your country when he tried to come in with guns. He's more likely to be someone who is going to comply with you, right? And even if that is not true, that narrative is going to be useful when he goes into any meeting room. Even if it's true that still on the inside he's not going to budge, it's better now for the way that people perceive him. And in those kinds of things, that means that his discussions with foreign policy means that a lot more people are more willing to want to support him, right? As opposed to those nations that are more likely to want to support like Russia and China, because they believe that at least Russia and China don't treat them like they're less than them. At least Russia and China want to try and benefit them in some way, right? So when the US is able to bring themselves to the level of other individuals and show them, right, that I'm not going to be superior to you, that's when it's a lot more likely that those nations that are, in line with other rogue nations are more likely to want to be in line with them, because now they recognize these are not guys that are trying to impose themselves upon me. These are guys that are trying to protect me. The AE is something of the past. We need to get on with the future, and the future is equality. Thank you.
Deputy Prime Minister, I invite the leader of opposition.
This debate requires clarity as to why exceptionalism is important for America in what they are doing for the current world, as to why America is distinct not only for their benefits, but also the harm and the unique threat that they pose to their individuals. We agree with the Prime Minister. Things that the authorities are messed up in America. Gerrymandering and politics is an issue in the state in which it functions. This is why these things need recognition. We recognize that we are superior, so we need to be superior in dealing with the issues in our nation. We need to take a fight against corruption that exists. We need to apprehend the individuals who cause the harm in the nation at large. We need to combat xenophobia and racism. American exceptionalism is the way in which we use our citizens and we motivate them to fight the problems that exist in status quo. So I'm going to ask 3 questions in this debate that clarifies our contribution as to why we agree with opening government, why part of their material is truistic, moving on to disregarding the balance. So 3 questions. 1, is American exceptionalism important in helping other nations or to providing a role model and a guide to emulate? Secondly, whether negative exceptionalism is an important part of this debate and why it was disregarded or discredited by the Deputy Prime Minister. Thirdly, let's look at American citizens, because their claim is that exceptionalism breeds racism, breeds xenophobia, and causes superiority in nations. Even if that is true, we'll prove why we're fine with trading that off. Have a seat. Firstly, their claim is that exceptionalism is not important in funding or resources in terms of helping other nations. Their direct response is that other countries don't need this recognition. Countries like Germany, countries like Hungary, they're taking refugees and try to help other individuals. This is not a response. It is the recognition that other countries don't need exceptionalism. It is not disregarding that it's any more justified than any other foreign policy that we take into consideration. We do tell our German citizens that it is right what we are doing, the way we're taking in refugees. American exceptionalism is more widespread. It is telling individuals that our actions and justifications into helping individuals, and whatever we do in dealing with foreign policy is justified. So her response as to our foreign policy is not necessarily true. So other countries do it without the superiority complex, but that doesn't mean the superiority complex is any less justified. This also means the United States forefronts many international foreign affairs, like our sanctions on Iran. It doesn't mean a unilateral action is wrong most of the time. It just means at the end of the day, it is a superior action that does need a forefront and does need a global powerhouse. The recognition that we are no different from any other state is also the recognition that we don't need to do anything else like any other state. The recognition that we don't have the ability to create change because America isn't special. America doesn't have the reputation and the obligation to help and save the rest of the world. At best, under their paradigms, they don't recognize superiority. But what's the problem? People in America do think they're superior. So the moment you remove exceptionalism, the support for helping foreign nations decreases. People are less likely to support your foreign sanctions. People are less likely to support your foreign affairs because we are not superior. We can just be like every every other nation at the end of the day. The problem with a negative policy is when you remove exceptionalism, the effects on America are significantly harmful in comparison to other countries. Have a seat. So we are helping other countries, but at best, if your response is true, removing exceptionalism harms America in comparison to other nations. It means we have lesser of an ability because citizens think we are no longer superior. Why am I fighting a war that I was never a part of? They are different from other citizens. We need to fit with these circumstances. But the second contention, superiority causes problems. We cause problems in the Middle East. We cause problems in other nations. Our argument is that we have earned exceptionalism back. We have earned it past the harms that we have caused in the Middle East. We're removing troops in Afghanistan. We're pulling out our troops from foreign policy because we recognize that these things are harmful. We're moving towards doing things in a superior complex that are more beneficial and generally accepted within society. We might have lost it in the past, but we've accepted it back. We are moving towards doing the right things in these states. We need and we deserve that superiority. Have a seat. Let's look at the second issue. What about exceptionalism? What about all the problems that exist? This is when we tell you a lot of the Prime Minister's speech was truistic. He told us gerrymandering exists in America, corruption exists in America, discrimination exists in America. This is all true. And these are all things that are highlighted. When politicians come up and say, we are special in the way we deal with liberalization, but we are also special when we have the highest corruption rates among most liberal countries. When we are also special when we have things that don't exist in other nations, when people are shot down for being innocent. These things need to be highlighted. Negative exceptionalism is a trend that we do use to debunk the problems that exist in our nation. The recognition that we are special, but we do have problems in our nations, motivates individuals to challenge these issues. We need to be the cleanest country in our world. Considering that we are superior, we need to get rid of all the semblances of negativism in our country. People want to be special and superior. So the existence of negative exceptionalism means people will move towards getting rid of these issues. We garner support for getting rid of corruption. We garner support for challenging racism and discrimination because people want to be positively exceptionate and not negatively exceptionate. Opening. You have no chance to respond.
So if being superior is the only reason why the US would improve, at some point in time when it's clear that they aren't superior, isn't that detrimental to your progress in the long run?
We think exceptionalism is something that we tell our citizens. Because at the end of the day, the well-being of telling our citizens that we are exceptional reaps much more benefits to our foreign affairs. Telling our citizens that we are unique. We need to help other individuals in other nations. Telling our citizens that we are unique in the way we deal with our issues forces us to go into a higher playing field because we need to create liberal policies for other nations to emulate. Exceptionalism might have harms, but negative exceptionalism allows us to curb those harms by telling people that we are special, so we need to rid ourselves of these problems. But at the end of the day, we think that at the end, a large portion of this debate was also ignore our foreign policy in dealing with abortion and pro-choice issues. Countries are more likely to emulate our policies when we branch out ourselves as the exceptional country and the country that is superior. This is something that was never responded to by the Deputy Prime Minister. How foreign countries adopt our policies because we branch it out to be the liberal and right policies. It doesn't matter whether it's done out of self-interest, but other countries are more likely to accept our policies when we branch ourselves out to be superior. Let's look at the last issue. Very clear, quickly. American exceptionalism makes people more racist. This is untrue. Xenophobia and racism exist wherever we are. In Australia, in Sweden, in Hungary. All these areas also have xenophobia and racism. It is not a breed of exceptionalism. It is a breed of xenophobia and the fear of refugees on the ground. It has nothing to do with exceptionalism. We are teaching people to accept refugees in our nations. That is a separate issue and an issue that they cannot conflate with this debate. Exceptionalism means that our citizens are different. It means that we can deal with issues differently. It means we can liberalize differently. It also means we need to stop ourselves from being negative. Because if America is so special, we can't have all these issues in our country.
Time that you'll spend the second half of the day, I invite my
Have water?
It's not ours.
Whose?
I don't know.
Oh, it's one of theirs.
What if it's not water? What if it's not water?
What if it's water?
There we go.
It's really smelly.
Correct.
Ladies and gentlemen, every time our moms tell us that we are exceptional, there is no underlying connotation within that message that tells you, girl, you have some issues. When a person tells you that you are exceptional, it means that you are a superior being over everyone else and that you can claim the ownership to the standard of success. We think that this debate in opening exchange has been like a little hazy in the way in which they engage in this debate because there was no engagement in terms of why this person specifically needs to make this active decision. So the way in which closing government will enter this debate is that as that president, how do you best strategize yourself to ensure that you can carry out meaningful actions to ensure a meaningful term in presidency given the polarizing context that exists in America, ladies and gentlemen. So we agree with opening opposition that this debate needs clarity. That's why we disagree with the fact that opening opposition wanted to engage in a selective characterization to what this debate is about. Ladies and gentlemen, stop shaming me. Firstly, here's some important contextualization and characterization that is needed in this debate. Number one, America presupposes that it is the bastion of human rights, claims that it is the world's economic and security overlord. Ladies and gentlemen, stop pointing. Secondly, how does American exceptionalism necessarily work? Number one, we are better than everyone else. That is the true definition of what exceptionalism necessarily means. But secondly, everyone owes us a duty to fulfill our standards of success and our expectations of greatness and how they're supposed to be, ladies and gentlemen. It is an exceptionally powerful rhetoric that disallows other individuals, even within the citizens of the United States of America, like Native Americans or third-generation immigrants, to be able to claim this identity because they are not true Americans, ladies and gentlemen. Even if there is a negative characterization to what AE is, we think the more overwhelming rhetoric is you are superior over others. We agree with opening government. So before I move on to why it is strategic to change the language of discourse to ensure that there's behavioral change as well as policy changes in the United States of America, several points of responses. Number one, the idea of opening opposition is that we are superior. Therefore, people from other countries accept us as being superior and we want to be them. We would argue from closing government that people from other countries don't feel, accept, or affirm that the United States of America is the best. Your AE rhetoric imposes your superiority onto other countries, ladies and gentlemen. Oftentimes, taking the position of being the chair of the United Nations or owning a large stake in the World Trade Organization or sacrificing the Middle East based on your arbitrary need of peace and security. That is why Russia and China often take the position of clashing with the United States because they disagree that you are superior in this regard. So we will argue that America coerces people to want to be like them, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think consent exists. So even if we accept that people want to emulate, we don't think they do. Because oftentimes, different countries have things like culture, religion, and national identity that is specific to that particular region. We often argue that American exceptionalism sacrifices all of these considerations based on arbitrary standards, ladies and gentlemen. Lastly, opening opposition argue that we can't affect change because no one wants to listen to us. We think, in closing government, we think that it's a good thing if people don't want to listen to the United States of America. The way it works right now in status quo is that America is often independent from criticism because they can always argue, you cannot criticize me because you owe me many good things, ladies and gentlemen. And it extends to other allies as well. We think that this is problematic at the point in which a country can be free from criticism. At this point, we can't question problematic policies like immigration reforms as well as the creation of Guantanamo Bay that actively tortures people. We think that's problematic. So extension. Why is it strategic to change the language of discourse which can ensure there is a probability of behavioral change that can ultimately lead to policy change? So firstly, how does denouncing AE lead to behavioral changes? We would argue from closing government that America is stuck in a perpetual cycle of polarizing positions, especially in politics. So you see the Republicans and Democrats not being able to come together because one feels very strongly about protecting the sanctity of our land, as well as the other feeling very strongly about social justice being the end-all be-all, ladies and gentlemen. So oftentimes, this discussion leads to a deadlock because they can't agree to what extent are we willing to sacrifice our standard of superiority over everyone else's ability to attain social justice, ladies and gentlemen. That is why the Congress and the House of Representatives always clash in terms of agreeing what policy are we willing to institute. Are we willing to engage in war with Syria? Are we willing to engage in an economic battle with Russia as well as China, ladies and gentlemen? Which means that as a president that is newly elected, allowing for this perpetual cycle of polarization means that your term as president achieves little to no change in terms of how you create meaningful change, ladies and gentlemen. Which means that even if you get elected to a second term, there is very little likelihood that you are able to carry out policies effectively. The most that you can do is being pushed to run policies that are already in effect in status quo, i.e. always going into war or always engaging in a negative battle with Russia, ladies and gentlemen. So how does this person then make their term meaningful? We'll talk about this from three different aspects in terms of war, in terms of immigrants, as well as trade, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, in terms of war, the American exceptionalism rhetoric translates to communities and telling them that we owe a duty to American citizens over everyone else, because apparently every single problem in the world will always affect American citizens, ladies and gentlemen. So you see, post the 9/11 attacks, the creation of Guantanamo Bay and creation of an arbitrary standard to what constitutes a threat to American citizens, even though they were not proximate to these threats, ladies and gentlemen. You saw extrajudicial killings like in Pakistan when they targeted Osama bin Laden, as opposed to going through the necessary judiciary process. You saw sanctions without regard for individual citizens' rights, like in Iran, ladies and gentlemen. The outcome is that there is an attack that exists in terms of how you deal with foreign policies. What we will argue is that when you inculcate this behavioral change as a president taking a position of influence, that you show to people there are other methods of engagement that you can opt into, i.e. being diplomatic and not always impulsively acting out of fear and paranoia, because no one is an actual threat to us, because no one is proximate to us, ladies and gentlemen. In terms of immigrants, we will argue that if you're not fully American, if you're second or third generation Chinese American that exists, you are considered not to be an actual meaningful owner of that particular land, ladies and gentlemen. Because oftentimes AE is white-centric in nature. That is why Mexicans and Latinos don't get to materialize their benefits in that country, which means that you allow for perpetual cycle of xenophobia to exist. You saw the Churchill shooting randomly targeting Muslims that have been in that country for a long time just because they were Muslims. In terms of trade, we tell developing nations to follow suit without disregarding the fact that structural inefficiencies that can't deal with our laws. Things like IP laws not being as extensive in other countries in comparison to the United States, which means that as a president, to ensure a comprehensive growth all around the world, you have to take a position of breaking the standard of success, superiority, and exceptionalism to allow for everyone to be able to meaningfully achieve change. As that president, to ensure that your term is meaningful, comprehensive, and good, you would take this position. I've never been prouder to propose.
Member of Government, I invite the Member of Parliament. Here, here. This way.
Yeah.
I find it hilarious how in an ICRC IHL debate that no one has spoken about human rights until my turn. What side CO will talk about is how we as the president, which is re-elected, will not denounce American exceptionalism, because America is inherently different from other nations in that America is the forefront of championing human liberty, human rights, and human equality worldwide. I have 3 extensions for you today, and my rebuttals will be integrated into my extensions. Firstly, on how United States is the forefront of this human liberty, right? Because we tell you on the first level on how the United States is a model of what other countries should be like in terms of achieving social equality, in terms of how feminism, the push for feminism in United States has led to pushes for feminism worldwide, and the same thing for LGBT also, and how United States is pushing for democracy, representation of people worldwide, and also even through culture, Mr. Speaker, on how their culture leads to people like achieving better sexuality, providing sexual education worldwide, Mr. Speaker, and how we recognize how this might be construed as Western imperialism, but we argue so far that all these things are inherently good things that the United States is trying to push throughout the rest of the world, Mr. Speaker. So on the second level, right, besides being a model, right, we also tell you how the United States has taken actions to ensure that they can ensure equality worldwide, which is what they have been which is what side government has been trying to push, sit down please, on how in the Middle East, how the Sunnis in Syria has looked towards United States to combat this Islamic State, right? When no other nation out there is willing to do so, and on how Palestine, for example, is hoping that Israel's staunchest ally, which is US, will help push them towards a two-state solution to end the conflict in Israel-Palestine, and how even without regards to foreign policy, how other countries look towards US to stop FGM, child labor, ritual killing, all these things, right? What is the conclusion to this argument, right? That United States is the only country out there which is dedicated towards helping humans out there achieve better equality, human rights by through their foreign policy and their aid and the humanitarian agencies, right? Moving on to my second extension on why is this important? Because from what OG talked about is they say, oh, okay, United States doesn't only have to be the country that does this, right? We can also have other countries like Russia and China, right? But we tell you that this cannot materialize because Russia and China are countries which are the worst countries in the world if you want them to perpetrate this kind of human rights that you're looking for, right? Because what Deborah said is that okay, United States should move out from these foreign policies because they have committed so much mistakes in the past, Mr. Speaker. We tell you that just because they've committed mistakes in the past, it does not mean that they cannot learn from their mistakes. It does not mean that they cannot contribute towards making a better foreign policies, towards helping other countries in status quo, Mr. Speaker. And on the second level, right, even if they commit atrocities, even if they've committed atrocities in the past, it does not mean that if the United States pulls out now, that other countries who are helping to combat this problem will do so in a necessary better way. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have to acknowledge that that there will always be a reigning power globally, Mr. Speaker. If it's not America, it will be Russia or China. And look at how Russia and China handles conflicts, right? Look at how Russia systematically oppresses LGBT communities within their country. Look at how China has a poor human rights record whereby they arbitrarily detain humans, whereby they oppress freedom of speech, whereby they commit so much atrocities within their own country. Can you imagine what would the world turn to if we let China and Russia take over the action of ensuring equality and human rights worldwide, Mr. Speaker? So what is the conclusion to this argument, right? That even if we aren't exceptional, we have to be, because other countries look towards us for help, because other countries depend on us to ensure equality towards them, and how this is much worse if we let Russia and China perpetrate this sort of foreign policy, right? And moving on to my third extension on how analyzing the consequences of this debate, because from closing side, only from closing side we analyzed how there's a time sensitivity of this issue, right? When we talked about how as a newly elected president, you have to do something to stop this, right? And Jay talked about how if a president allows this to happen, you lead to more polarization, and you lead to countries, the presidents not being able to achieve any meaningful policies during this term, right? We reject this on two levels. Firstly, when they say how they will lead to polarization, Kenneth already talked to you about how citizens in the country inherently already accept American exceptionalism through denouncing Bernie Sanders and all that. So we don't think this will happen. On the second level, right, even if polarization happens, there are such things as term limits. So because Obama is in a unique position whereby he's not going to be re-elected, he can continue to push forward policies that can help ensure equality, ensure human rights worldwide, because he's not standing for re-election, Mr. Speaker. He does not have to care about being re-elected. He does not have to pander towards people. And so we tell you that as a newly elected president, yes, you can commit to all these policies, right? And we talked to you about how if we allow our citizens to perpetrate this, to have this narrative that we are not the best countries in the world, then this leads to negative consequences whereby when other countries look towards us, when other countries need us to mobilize our own countries, citizens for war, when our country needs to help, we cannot do so because our own country's citizens are not able to be conscripted for war because they have been too desensitized by all the killings out there. Don't even care because we are not special, right? What obligations do we have to protect the human rights of other people, right? So because we accept that America has an obligation and that in the near future, America has to do something with regards to Islamic states and also with regards to border disputes in the South China Sea, then we accept that it's very important that America needs to have citizens that care, needs to have citizens that think that they have an obligation to help the citizens of the world worldwide, right, Mr. Speaker? And with that, we are very, very proud to oppose.
Next member of opposition. I invite Government Whip.
Madam Chair, what has largely been ignored in this debate from side opposition was the language in which American exceptionalism has been played out in politics and the way in which white supremacists are able to capitalize on that exact narrative. We think that the lack of reality on side opposition means that they weren't fully able to understand how American exceptionalism has been affecting America for a very long time. We think this has been an outdated narrative and we're very willing to denounce it. We think opening government have been good at providing us a laundry list of why American exceptionalism is false, but didn't tell you why the language and narrative of American exceptionalism, how they created those harms, and how denouncing that exact exceptionalism will create positive policy and behavioral changes in America. We think that the moment you start your term as a president will create the path to all the future policies you said, just as Jay pointed out in her speech. That means that the moment you start your term as a president, you need to start it out with policies that are consistent throughout the rest of your term. And we think this is the best ways to start it. No, thank you. We think that American exceptionalism have long affected our policies on things like war and intervention. She already told you that the way in which war and intervention happens under American exceptionalism is to always prioritize the safety of our people first, regardless of whether it's reasonable or regardless of whether or not it's appropriate. So that means that because of 9/11 and the tragedy that unfortunately unfolded and the amount of people that died, we are very willing to wage and start a war and kill a lot more people over there. That has been the least of Americans' consideration because our lives are always significantly more important than the lives of people over there. We think that has been very problematic. We think denouncing it particularly will grant immediate changes towards the behavior and the way in which we see the world. That means that the language of politicians will also change. The way in which politicians will justify wars will be significantly different. They have to also take into consideration the amount of casualty of people in Iran, the amount of casualty of people in Iraq, and realize that policies must also accommodate for the amount of life lost over there. We think those policy changes are extremely important. That we also think that American exceptionalism, like Jay pointed out, because of their historical ties, language and rhetoric have been long capitalized by the white community. That means that they have been exclusive in nature. They have not been good at helping either people who are Latinos, Mexicans, and so on. Those people, despite being legitimate American citizens, are still discriminated under status quo. We think this has not changed since American exceptionalism was inserted. A lot of people who still believe in that rhetoric and people who buy into that rhetoric feel that them discriminating against those people are perfectly justified because those people are never and will never be Americans. No, thank you. Now let's first engage with what came out from closing opposition. They say that America is the forefront of human rights and liberty. That is the single largest joke that we've heard in this debate. Firstly, America has structural ways in which homosexuals can get married, but account for the most amount of hate crime and discrimination since that structural law has been introduced. And furthermore, Australia actually beat America to it and have legalized gay marriage before America did. Transsexuals are still not allowed into the military and not properly recognized in America. So that means that social liberties for the discriminated are still not good enough. Slaves still have not gained reparations, and so on. But still, We must acknowledge, however, that America has granted more rights for American citizens in comparison to citizens who are people who are not American. That means that this is an exact demonstration that America prioritized the rights of homosexuals to get married over the rights of Muslims to not be oppressed and not be harmed and tortured in Guantanamo Bay. The way in which the media covered homosexual marriages was as though they were oppressed significantly more than the way in which media covers the way in which Arabs or Muslims were tortured in Guantanamo Bay. That means that even if they have human rights standards that are better than certain other countries, their human rights standards have certain priority that we think are completely horrible. Their priority is always to prioritize people of their own country and solve first world problems as opposed to actual torture and actual discrimination that happens. We think that's horribly bad. We think if other countries were to emulate this, there will be a horrible policy for every other country to emulate. No, thank you. We think a human right, there are other ways in which we can emulate human rights. For example, a human rights declaration exists. European has a European human rights courts. There are various other means. Even the Vatican is better at spreading this message of human rights compared to America. We also think that human rights are things that can be liberalized at pace in different countries, and they should be able to do that. Before that, go ahead.
So we're talking about international conflicts. When the UN is in a deadlock about Syria, Iran, and even ISIS, why can't the US take matters into their own hand and take their own international protocol? Because this is fueled by the superiority in helping people in Syria.
Perfect. So let's now talk about the powerhouse that United States is and why we need an accountable check and balance against United States' ability to help people. Because in reality, when we think United States are helping people, in actuality, they don't always do so. Like Jay told you, firstly, most of their help or aid are extremely imposing in nature. For example, denouncing cultural feminism, imposing liberal values on developing nations, condemning Sharia laws in various developing nations. We think that has been exceptionally bad. But secondly, we think that when it comes to intervention, let's first break this premise that we always need America to help us more. Iran, Afghanistan, Israel, and Palestine are all demonstration, and for, of course, ISIS, demonstration of which American help has failed and created more conflict in the first place. That means that it's not that we need America to intervene more. We need them to change their methods in which they intervene. And the only way to do that is to break that American exceptionalism and allow other countries to refute and criticize them meaningfully. If they are more open to criticism and less rejective of all this criticism based on American exceptionalism, then we think that makes them a more accountable body as well. That means that, for example, like UK, Scandinavian countries, most of them provide aid and scholarship without conditions. But most of America's aid and scholarship always comes with conditions of liberalization. They are horrible upon countries that cannot accept those conditions. We think we prefer a world in which America don't think their values are superior to other people and be more accepting of other people's value and help people on that basis. We think that can only happen by denouncing American exceptionalism. Even if we reduce things like sanctions, intervention, and aid from America, we think that will be beneficial because most of the things they do right now have not been beneficial because of the methods in which they conduct most of their intervention based on superiority. We're extremely proud to propose.
We don't have this perfect super state or perfect global police to police the world. At least we have America. Ladies and gentlemen, what we on closing say that America may not be the most perfect advocate of human rights or things like that, but it is the closest country that it is at the peak of human rights relative to other countries in the world. It is closest to whatever that standard of perfection is, and that is why the exceptionalism is legitimate, ladies and gentlemen. So
down to my rebuttals on the opening. Basically, they were just pointing out, well, basically what the entire government has done is painted out all the problems like white supremacy, things like racism and all that exist in America, problems that exist everywhere else, ladies and gentlemen. You can't expect any country in the world to be perfect in every single way because that is the dream, ladies and gentlemen. What we are trying to say is that to the standard of perfection that exists, ladies and gentlemen.
Sure.
And also, what happens when something like exceptionalism exists? You are saying that you are the best, people see that you are saying you are the best, and therefore people openly criticize you even more. People can see the problems, people can point them out, and they are assuming that America has no incentive to correct these problems, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, their president is a black. They have recently, you can see all they have been making very big progresses. So many countries have been accepting LGBT marriages. America is improving. They are constantly improving standard. Yes, okay, go.
Things like Guantanamo Bay, things like requiring the judiciary to come in and overturn bans on gay
Okay.
marriages.
Alright,
Why is
alright.
this a standard of success for human rights?
They are a country of free speech. Of course, they are going to have people with weird thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, and they need to entertain them. However, ladies and gentlemen, things are good. Recently, the US has been considering talks to close down Guantanamo Bay, ladies and gentlemen. There have been progress made to counter the problems they've had in the past. You can't discredit them just because they have made mistakes in the past. Everyone makes mistakes, ladies and gentlemen. So, and also another major thing, sit down. Another major thing that the Thai government has not brought into light, ladies and gentlemen, is they have discredited America for all the contributions that it has made to the global community. They made very light of it, ladies and gentlemen. Take the current issues like the South China Sea or take Syria. If America isn't there, who is going to do anything about it? If all countries are equal, no one is going to have the incentive to want to propagate human rights. Unless you're saying that the global police should be countries like Russia or China, who don't even care about human rights, as Chris had already mentioned earlier, and I'm sure all of you know. And here's one of the main points that I'm going to try to argue on, which is neutrality, ladies and gentlemen. How America has the most neutrality among all the other global powerhouses in the world. Sit down. Now, when you talk about the P5 nations, we don't even, okay, let's just ignore Russia and China because I don't want to harp to you about all the shit that they have done in the past years. Then we come to the European, to countries like the UK and France, who don't give a shit about anyone else outside the European Union. They have brought about Merkel, who allowed all the refugees to come in. But ladies and gentlemen, that is when European Union was faced with pressure when the problem came to them. America doesn't need a problem to come to it for it to propagate or to come up and save the world from whatever problem it has, ladies and gentlemen. And neutrality is something that America has, which is unique to every other country, which makes it unique and hence justifies exceptionalism, ladies and gentlemen. And also, what happens when you say that you're the best? Your people say that you're the best, people everywhere else says that you're the best, is that now you have the problem. If you do not have exceptionalism, if your people think that you are not better than everyone else, ladies and gentlemen, then if I were to go to Syria, if I were to put effort into solving the problem in the South China Sea, what are my people going to say? How are we obligated to do anything like that? What would the military say? What would everyone say? Why would I want to waste my time on countries other than myself? Unless, ladies and gentlemen, I have a standard to meet, unless we all know that I am the global police, ladies and gentlemen, I have a moral obligation because I am the standard that of human rights and propagation of justice in the world, ladies and gentlemen. It is an incentive for the United States, the people in the United States, the politicians there, and for countries outside of the United States, ladies and gentlemen. Now, go, open
The
it.
states believing that it was the moral police of the world meant that when it went into Syria, it ended up arming certain Syrian rebels that became a part of ISIS. It's okay if they don't become the moral police of the world.
So, ladies and gentlemen, again, they are trying to say that America is not perfect, and we agree with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, of course, America is the only country that is trying to propagate justice on such a large scale, ladies and gentlemen, and you assume they are going to do everything perfectly. Of course, there are going to be problems. We understand that, ladies and gentlemen, but please do not disregard the benefits that America has brought to this world. Everyone makes mistakes, ladies and gentlemen, and when you come to talk about the shift pushing, the blame pushing in Afghanistan and things like that, ladies and gentlemen, as the global police, America needs to maintain its status and its image as a global police. When people lose trust in you, if people think that you are doing a bad job, of course, people, like them, then of course people wouldn't seek America's help, and we do not want that, ladies and gentlemen. America doesn't want that. America needs to maintain this position where it is exceptional, where it is better than everyone else, so that it can give its people an incentive to help others and for others to seek help from them, ladies and gentlemen. Only then can America propagate, and it has the capability to propagate justice. Sit down. Moving on. So on to closing. Now they claim that that other countries need to fight America to meet their standards. And ladies and gentlemen, we say that it's a good thing. It's a good thing for countries to try to coerce to become America, because you are trying to meet a standard, the best possible standard, ladies and gentlemen. And also when they talk about, they also talk about how the president can't do so much on a global scale because you can only push what is happening in status quo. And ladies and gentlemen, on closing, we say that status quo is fine. It is the best possible case scenario because there's not much else that you can do. They are not taking into consideration other variables like Russia and China or other inertias that are preventing America from doing more than it can. It could do more than it can, but they are not acknowledging the things that are not allowing it to. So we are saying status quo is perfectly fine. And if I'm a newly elected president, I will try to propagate status quo even more, attempt to end and status quo has been fine. Instead, you can look how America has been propagating things like LGBT, nuclear disarmament in Iran. America's been doing a good job, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, we are better than everyone else, and people have to acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge that, because the world needs a global police, and we do not want anyone else to be that global police, because we are the best possible candidate, ladies and gentlemen. You don't have any other choice. Thank you.
Healthy, you may cross walk, take hands, outside the university.